Hello and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out with some Russian advancements throughout the Seversk front, where first off we see that the Russians have managed to make a small advancements here to the northeast of Bilohorivka. Here we see that they managed to capture this forest line here, and as such they are at the outskirts of the village. The village of Bilohorivka has been a target of fighting for both the Russians and the Ukrainians for a very long time. At some points, the Russians had control of it, the Ukrainians recaptured it, and it is one village here in the Luhansk region that the Ukrainians have control of. Without that, there is this small section here in the north, and the Russians would have full control over the Luhansk region. So it's very symbolic that the Ukrainians hold this village to prevent the Russians from having 100% control of the Luhansk region. As such, we see that there's a lot of fighting taking place, and it is a high priority target for both sides due to the media and PR value, as well as morale value on holding this town. And as such, we're seeing that a lot of fighting is taking place, and the Russians recently made this advancement, getting them a better position and allowing them to get direct fire on Ukrainian positions throughout the village here to the southwest of these positions. We then move on to the Vesele direction, where it has been reported by the Russian Ministry of Defense and a multitude of other Russian sources that the Russians managed to gain control over Vesele. It is reported that the Ukrainians, after heavy pressure from the Russians controlling the heights here to the northeast of the village and the semi-encirclement from the south as well, allowing them to hit all of the Ukrainian supply lines, they were under so much pressure that they decided to withdraw from the village to fortified positions to the northwest of it and across the river here, allowing them to get better positions and prevent the Russians from advancing further over Vesele. So the Russians took control over Vesele as a response to that withdrawal, and as such the Russians now have control over the village. I'm waiting until further confirmation from Syriac maps, but it's pretty much guaranteed to be true. So with this, the Russians would likely focus more on the direction of Avdiivka as well as Spirene here to the east, as well as in the direction of Rostolivka. With the control over Vesele, they can now consolidate the gains here to the south of the Sukha Plotva river, and as such they would likely push further westwards. As soon as they have full control over the southern bank of the river line, we'll likely see them push here in a northern direction towards Rostolivka from the southwest and southeast of the village, and we may also see some potential advancements here to the north of Vesele, but there'll be a lot of fighting by the forest lines and entrenchments the Ukrainians have across this northern section. But with this, we see that the Russians are now one village closer to Seversk. We then move on to Avdiivka, where there is this geolocated footage which shows Russian positions being shelled by Ukrainian forces, and this shelling is taking place here in the northern parts of the village, which shows that the Ukrainian forces are pressuring the Russians in the outskirts of the village. The positions the Ukrainians lost here in the northern parts have been under Russian fire for a long time, therefore there's already a lot of difficult positions to hold their own fortified positions. The Russians would not be able to hold secure positions here in the northern parts due to the destruction that the village has faced, as we see in the small parts of the footage you are able to watch. And from that we see that there's utter destruction in this section. This therefore the potential advancements of the Russians is very difficult due to the Ukrainians being able to locate the Russian forces easily and therefore hit them accurately. But at the same time, the southern parts are also mostly destroyed, so they are pretty much on an even playing field. We then move on to the Avdiivka direction, where we have these two pieces of geolocated footage. The first one here to the northwest of the city, it shows shelling southeast of Nevelske on Ukrainian positions, and with this we're seeing some backline shelling on Ukrainian positions by the Russians with some of their Lancet drones and other long-range equipment. We also see this second piece of geolocated footage which shows Ukrainian positions further southeast of that, closer to the front line, being hit by FPV drones, and as such we see that there is this difference between the front line and the back line by which sort of drones being used to hit the targets. The Russians' FPV drones don't have a lot of range. They mostly just launch operations close to the front because they have to fly from their positions in the back, and therefore their range is very limited, while the Lancet drones, for example, have multitudes of kilometers of range, and therefore they can hit more backline targets such as artillery and other targets. We then move further south in the direction of Nevelske, where there has been further Russian advances here to the east of the village. The Russians managed to capture these two forest lines. From this, we see that there's further advancements and more pressure of the Russian forces on the Ukrainian side. This is confirmed by this geolocated footage, which shows Russian armored vehicles and soldiers advancing and fighting in this section. So with this, we're seeing that there is this constant advance by the Russians here in this section of the front, pressuring the Ukrainian positions in the area and inching closer and closer to the Ukrainian positions. While the majority of the fighting is actually based on artillery and drones, we also see that there is some small assault groups advancing and storming Ukrainian positions here to the east of Nevelske. Finally, we move on to the Krynky direction, where here there's been an interesting analysis made by my source of geolocated footage, and this shows a list of 28 artillery pieces being hit on the western bank of the Dnieper River on the Ukrainian side. These 28 pieces of artillery, which all have a dates as to when they were hit, from the 1st of November to the 16th of January, 28 different pieces of artillery were hit all throughout the Krynky direction. And from this, we see that it is likely that the Russian purpose with dragging out this fight in Krynky was not just to hit the Ukrainian soldiers in this part, but also to hit the Ukrainian artillery. We're seeing that a lot of these targets through the western bank of the Kherson River have taken place over the past 2 months, and we also see the fact that the Russians have managed to hit Ukrainian artillery every other day pretty much throughout these months of Ukrainian operations in Krynky, shows that despite the hunger of shells throughout the Ukrainian ranks and them having to save on other areas, they still put a lot to fight here in the Krynky direction. So yes, it is true that the Russians took a lot of losses launching some of these armored operations towards Krynky, where one specific day there was about 5 or 6 armored vehicles if being filmed by a Ukrainian drone on one day. This was released by Deep State Map and I covered it on my channel. But at the same time, we are seeing that this much artillery being hit on the Ukrainian side is devastating for them. We, for example, see these past few days from the 11th to the 16th, there were 7 different artillery pieces hit. On the 21st piece, which was on the 11th, 2 on the 12th, 1 on the 13th, 1 on the 14th, 2 on the 15th, and 1 on the 16th. This is all recent, and this is all at a very short time frame, and this is when we started seeing advancements here. On the 14th and on the 17th, 3 days in between, we saw multiple advances by the Russians after them destroying multiple pieces of Ukrainian artillery here on the western bank of the Dnieper River. So we're seeing that the Russians not just grinded down Ukrainian infantrymen going across the Dnieper River with limited supplies, but also the Ukrainian artillery covering these advancements and covering their positions with counter-fire strikes, trying to hit the Russian forces trying to counterattack the Ukrainian positions here in Krynky. And with that, we see that the toll on Krynky was very heavy, and it was the bane of the Ukrainian artillery in this section of the front line. And as such, we see heavy Ukrainian casualties when it comes to the artillery compared to the normal fighting elsewhere. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.